as many times as you'd like down the road. So Kaitlin, she has Behavior, Education, and Communications from the University of Michigan, from the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And she, as a behavior scientist, Kaitlin has focused both academically and professionally on improving the environment and creating sustainable communities through effective programming that fosters voluntary behavior change. She enjoys helping organizations focus on how to achieve their goals through a better understanding of the challenges their audience is facing and linking that understanding to data-driven strategies to overcome these challenges that eventually lead to change. Over the past 7 years, she has applied this expertise in a multitude of environmental and sustainability topics, including recycling, composting, water conservation, forest conservation, and energy. Her work has been published in the Journal of Applied Environmental Education and Communication, the Washington State Recycling Association newsletter, the International Association of Fairs and Expos magazine, and the Biocycle magazine and Resource Recycling. So I'm excited to have Kaitlin here, and with that, I will pass over the presentation. Take it away, Kaitlin.
All right, thanks so much, John. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great.
Okay, great, perfect. All right, so thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here today as well and to be talking to you guys about evaluation. For me, this is a really critical topic to talk about. It's one that, honestly, I know gives some people a little achy stomach, thinking about having to set all this stuff up and get this done. But, I know probably everyone on this call got into the field they got into because they want to make a difference, and, you want to know how you're doing and what impact you're making on the world. And really, evaluation is just such a critical part of that, of understanding, what you're accomplishing, how it's being accomplished, how you can improve. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about how you can make better evaluations and how we can always make sure that not making the perfect the enemy of the good. Okay. So, as I'm sure, again, everyone on here knows, evaluation is something that often gets skipped in program implementation for a number of reasons. First, sometimes funders or organizations don't really require that you evaluate. You want to just put the program out there. It's something they've been doing for a while. It's status quo, or we just kind of assume it works, so we don't bother spending the time on evaluation. There's also perception that to really do a successful evaluation, you need to understand complicated statistics, being able to run, inferential, statistics on t-tests and ANOVAs and all that, when really we can get a lot of great information even just from descriptive, percentages, means, and that kind of stuff. There's also an idea that you have a lack of research method knowledge, so, I don't know how to put this kind of stuff out there. I don't know how to design a survey or run a focus group. And I'm going to, in the end of this presentation, give you some great resources to really go into depth on those topics and lightly touch on them in this presentation today. And, of course, a common theme of all programs is cost and time. It's going to take financial resources to put an evaluation out there, and it takes time away that we could be spending implementing other programs or, various other tasks that we need to accomplish in our work life. However, I'm going to make the argument here that evaluation is absolutely critical and really should not be skipped, and there's so many great reasons to do it, including, it's really the only way we can help learn how to improve our program. Even programs that are working well and having success have ways to improve, and we really can't learn that unless we're truly engaging with what is going wrong and how do we fix it. It's also great to help us prepare for budget cuts, so if you can then justify and say, look, my program's having this level of impact, we're having this, this is our how much we're spending, it can really prepare you when you come up against someone saying, well, maybe we should cut it, the budget's tight this year. Evaluation can help you learn your return on investment, so especially if you want to consider there's different ways you could implement your program through perhaps mailers or door-to-door or events. You can look at the different impact, the differential impact that each of those implementation methods gets and say, well, is it worth the extra investment in time and resources to do door-to-door, or can we get enough of an impact from mailing things out that we should stick with that for now and consider what we do later? And finally, more so, it's being required by funders and granting organizations that you demonstrate not only that you have an impact in terms of, website hits and event attendance, but whether you're achieving behavioral change and behavioral impacts on environmental goals. So the real key for evaluation, and if you get one thing out of this, is what I hope you get, is that you really need to start planning for evaluation before you implement. If you've already put your program out there and coming in then trying to figure out how to evaluate, it's going to take you a lot more time, a lot more cost, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. Because when you're starting before implementation, you can think of things such as, are there already existing data collection efforts that I can leverage? For example, I worked on a program once where we were doing stuff around getting materials into the correct composting and recycling and trash bins, and the city already runs waste audits on a certain regular basis. So we set up our program around having the audits be run right after we completed it. So we didn't end up needing to spend the extra money on evaluating and doing those waste audits ourselves. Or similarly, you might be sending out a mailer already and it could include a survey with it. Starting before implementation also gives you an opportunity to collect a baseline so you can see what your audience is doing before. It allows you to ensure that your budget has sufficient space to do an implementation and make sure that you allot enough time that you will have the ability to evaluate the way you would like to. So when you're planning for an evaluation, there's a couple key things to keep in mind when you're starting. First, you want to make sure you're setting out specific measurable goals. So, your overarching goal might be that this program is successful, but, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get, reduction in water usage at a residential level? Are you trying to get people to do a specific behavior? So you want to make sure there are things that you can actually measure and set forth so you know what kind of data you want to collect. You should also think about the purpose of the evaluation. Is this for a funder? So you need to collect certain metrics that they need. Is it for understanding more about the specific tools and outreach materials you're using, or is it more generally about the larger impact of the behavioral goals? Consider your time and resources, so looking at, how much time do you have to devote to evaluation, to, survey development, to getting it out there, as well as how much resources you have, are there things you can leverage, so you, again, set forth enough time and resources, and that you make sure you're designing something that you can actually put forth into the field. It's also, whenever possible, good to think about using a control group. We work in the field, and it's not necessarily within our capacity to have a group of people that don't get a program that we can compare to. Sometimes we're obligated to put it out to everyone. But when you can, it's a lot stronger in your evaluation, because if you can show that, say, go on the water conservation example, that your people who got your outreach used less water over this time period than people who didn't get your outreach, then you can say, it wasn't about the weather and it wasn't about other programs going on, but it was fairly likely about my treatment, because these two groups were existing in the same place at the same time, and yet my outreach people used less water. So there's a lot of different types of data collection tools you can use for evaluation. They all have their pros and cons, and it's often good, if possible, to use more than one, because you can kind of balance out the pros and cons with them. There is self-report. This can be anything from surveys to interviews, focus groups, anything where your participants are reporting to you what they did. Interviews and focus groups can be great for collecting a lot of qualitative data about what they thought about your outreach or what they thought about what you said, but it's a smaller group of people, so you can't necessarily assume it applies across your audience. Surveys can apply across a large audience, which makes them a really effective tool, but it is, with all these self-reports, which has obviously potentially confounds where people may report what they think is the quote-unquote right answer instead of true answer or problems with memory recall and such, they are known issues and things you can account for. But that's good to keep in mind. You can use direct behavioral measures. So, for example, with water conservation, utilities report out on how much water is used, or energy companies. We often work with these groups, and they're willing to report, say, anonymized data. So all we need is a ID number that tells us if they're the treatment or the control. These are really great to be able to say, look, we're saving this much water, we're saving this much energy. Observations are a powerful data collection tool, and that's the image here is doing some observations on littering, specifically here in a beach location. They are great for any behavior you can see publicly, and it's really a great way to understand, what are people doing, how much behavior is happening, and collect some pretty thorough data on it. But it does, of course, take a resource investment of a person sitting and watching. And then there are secondary or indirect measures, such as purchase behavior. So if you wanted people to install low-flow shower heads, tracking how many purchases there were, or participation in your program, if you're running, say, a WaterWise landscaping program and how many people signed up. It is indirect because, of course, just because you buy a low-flow shower head or just because you enroll in a program doesn't mean you necessarily complete the behavior. But that's another great way that you can say, look, we had this much purchase behavior, and then we sent out this online survey, and people reported installing. So looking at those two factors together helps strengthen our data. But either way, having some information about what happened strengthens your program, helps you learn more, really not letting that, if it isn't the perfect evaluation where we can absolutely know 100% sure what everything happened, it's still really important to just learn more about it and collect the data you can. So I'm going to go quickly through a 7-step process to developing a survey, and then I'm going to give you the link to the book that I reference this from, so you can read them in depth if you're working on survey development of your own. So first is clarifying your objective, and this is something that's often missed when you develop a survey, but it's really important because this is what helps you keep your survey length under control. Because if you define here, I want to achieve the goal of understanding, how much behavior people, change, or what kind of knowledge they've gained. When you start developing questions, you're going to come back to this goal and say, are all these questions meeting my goal? And if they're not, you shouldn't ask those questions because you want to keep your survey limited. Next, listing items to be measured. So you start with any theme or idea that you might want to measure, so kind of free-flowing. I might want to measure about attitude change. I might want to measure about knowledge. I might want to ask them, about some related behaviors. Maybe if we're concerned with water, maybe I want to ask about a few different things. And then start prioritizing, okay, what of these themes most gets me towards my objective. So then as you start writing the survey and actually developing questions, again, keeping it limited to those themes you prioritized and keeping it limited to questions that truly achieve your objective, because ideally you want to keep any survey under 10 minutes. Even under 7 would be great. I fall prey to this too. You want to ask everything. We're really curious about our program. But, if we take a step back and think about the kind of surveys that we want to complete and the kind of surveys we, want to get engaged with, shorter the better, direct to the point. The other important thing to note with writing a survey is closed-ended questions, meaning there's either a Likert scale or a multiple choice, as opposed to open-ended, are pretty much always preferable because it is very challenging to analyze open-ended questions, because you may ask, what is the most important thing to you? Well, you don't really know if it's just what came top of mind. Maybe they would have rated other things important if you provided options, but they just didn't think of them right then. It's just very difficult to do analysis, and it's going to take you a lot longer. Piloting the survey, so having a few people, ideally somewhat like your audience, read it, give you feedback. selecting the sample. So this ultimately, the size you select depends on the audience size you're going for. So, if you're trying to be representative of an entire city versus a neighborhood, it's a little different, but generally around 50 to 100 responses can start to give you a good idea of what's going on, but again, very much depending on your sample, your total population size. Finally, conducting the survey, a lot of different modes you can take, and I don't have time to get into the discussion of mail versus online, but they both have their own pros and cons. And then analyzing the data. What's important to note here is there are a lot of statistical software that is free to use, such as R. You can also download statistical packages for Excel that can give you even so much as t-tests and ANOVAs that you can do within Excel. So just keeping in mind that you can do a lot of this analysis yourself for a fairly low budget. So overall, evaluate and budget, I've kind of talked on this a couple times because ultimately it's really important that we spend our money effectively. We want to learn about a program, but, we all know we can't just throw all of our money into that. So kind of mostly hitting on the key points I've already run through, but plan early, to make sure that you include evaluation at points that are easy and beneficial to you, such as I mentioned, when you're already sending out an outreach. Maybe that's a great moment to do a small survey. Or if there are existing data collection efforts going on that you can leverage for yourself. Also looking at short-term outcomes, so don't start planning for, 1 year, 2 year evaluation. Start with the stuff that's happening, maybe the month after, and if you see good results, you can start thinking about longer term. You can also look at less rigorous design. So I earlier mentioned a control group. As I said, you can still learn a lot of stuff without doing that. It's just important when you're contextualizing data to say, we didn't have a control group, but this is still what we learned, and we're still going to use it in this way, but we'll keep in mind that we can't necessarily attribute it to our outreach because of the lack of control group. It's just, again, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Finally, lower cost methodology. Of course, for surveys, for example, sending out a mail survey is a higher cost than an online survey. So you can look at, are there ways that you can have a lower cost or a smaller sample that you're just going to reach out to some specific groups within your population to be most effective with your dollars. This book, Fostering Sustainable Behavior, An Introduction to Community-Based Social Marketing, Action Research, my organization uses community-based social marketing as our kind of planning and way we design programs. This book is available for free on www.cbsm.com, and a lot of the points I pulled from the evaluation and such are elaborated on in Step 2, barriers and benefit research, and I believe also in Step 4, piloting. So you can read more about them there, and that is available, as I said, for free on this website. And other potential tools if you're interested in learning more about behavioral programs, piloting, and often with evaluation as part of it here. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Kaitlin. I really appreciate that. So now we're going to move into the fun part of the presentation where we get to ask Kaitlin all sorts of questions. So if you want to chat in a question, that'd be great. I'm also going to go through and unmute. I don't know if I have a fast way to do this, but anyway, if you want to chat in a question, and we'll just take like 30 seconds here to wait for a few questions, that would be great.